be sitting down with Shawntell Kroese. She has a very experienced career in the rail industry. So Shawntell, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So maybe to kick things off, I would love to learn, a little bit about your background, how you got started in rail, and the different roles or functions that you've been able to see throughout your career.
Yeah, absolutely. So right out of college, I joined the Union Pacific Railroad and worked there for over 23 years, left last September, but have worked in a variety of different commercial roles. When I left, I was the vice president of the commercial subsidiary for Union Pacific, but was in 18 different roles over the course of my tenure, all in marketing and sales, but working very closely. A lot of my experience, almost half of my time, was in the intermodal space, and but have executive experience in the majority of the business areas that the railroad does business with.
And so talking about intermodal, would love to hear your opinion about opportunities for innovation, maybe some systems that you guys are working on right now internally. What are some of the quick wins, if you will, in the intermodal space for some of the startups to start to think about different ways to get involved or engaged?
Yeah, I think that intermodal is a logical place for startups to focus. It's the growth area for the entire rail industry. And so having some quick wins, finding ways to start integrating into the railroad, providing solutions to the railroad network, that makes a lot of sense. Modal also, there's no access issues. Every customer, every business could be a customer of intermodal. And so I also think that the experiences that startups have, interactions with all different kinds of businesses, also becomes very relevant and applicable when you think about that intermodal space. Now, I do believe there's opportunity beyond intermodal, but that is the area of business that is growing the fastest.
Sure. And because it's timely, can you maybe walk us through what's happening in the rail industry as a result of the current COVID-19 situation that we're all in?
Well, I've been out of the rail company since COVID started, but I think it's quite obvious. And with COVID-19, it really puts a spotlight on the importance of supply chain management and the importance of trucking companies and railroads and the logistics that are required to get us the products that we're used to just very easily getting off the shelves. So, when I think about this event and this webinar, as we think through some of the opportunities for more technology and better technology in the rail system, I think starting point one, there's certainly opportunities to make intermodal and railroading easier for customers. And so I think that is certainly a place where there's opportunity. Railroads, generally you don't hear that railroads are the easiest companies that they've ever worked with. And so I think there's some aspiration there that railroads have the opportunity to deliver a much better customer experience. And I know from my experience that there is a genuine desire for that to happen. All railroads want to step up and exceed customers' expectations in terms of the types of service that they're delivering. So technology will enable that in terms of delivering a ridiculously good customer experience for their customers.
And one thing we had a chance to chat about a little bit earlier was around visibility and integrations with your intermodal partners. And obviously that's becoming even more important today in maybe this new normal or the new abnormal. So from your perspective, kind of where does the industry sit in terms of visibility from a lot of the well-known players like Project 44 and Four Kites, et cetera? And what are some of those integrations and how rail fits into kind of a piece of the journey of the cargo going from A to B?
Yeah, I think that most railroads have made some type of commitment to improve visibility and help customers with some of these true demands that they have in terms of making it a more truck-like experience. But it's more complicated. You know, for truckers, they pick up the load from a warehouse or from a port and deliver it to another warehouses or distribution center or end customer. And it's one trucking company from point A to point B. When you talk about intermodal, most of the Class 1 railroads operate in more of a wholesale environment, which means that they're providing visibility of some sort from their ramp A to their destination ramp, and customers have to go other places to see the whole route. So, you know, Steamship Line has a tool that they use, and then when it gets to the port has a tool that they use, and then once it gets on that dray carrier, there may or may not be visibility from the port to that warehouse, and then from that warehouse to the ramp, there might be some visibility, maybe not. And then it jumps on a railroad, it might ride on more than one railroad. And so that means that there might be a requirement for a couple different systems, and then it jumps on a truck again. And so it's a complicated journey, if you will, for our customers in terms of the various tools that they have to be proficient in, how they use them. They're all slightly different. And so, you know, I think customers have seen what's available with trucking companies, and many of the large trucking companies have stepped up their spending and what they're developing for this ease of visibility. And I think in the more complicated network that intermodal presents, there's opportunity here to make this much easier, to not require so many different systems, or to get more common language across all of the different systems. And so I don't think it's a lack of system. It's a matter of taking what's great about many of these systems and thinking about it from a customer perspective. How do you make this much easier and much more accurate as you follow this journey from point A to point B? So I think there's opportunity here to make it much easier.
Yeah, and one of the things I think that we're starting to see a lot in the logistics industry is the ability to more accurately predict ETAs. And I know that the rail industry has long been a leader in a lot of the mathematical models around load scheduling and management, et cetera. So can you maybe speak to where we sit right now in the industry for being able to provide some of those predictive capabilities in terms of where my shipment is and where it's going? Obviously, there's some challenges there in the intermodal space because you have to speak to the different modes of transportation and their systems, but just more generally, kind of where does that technology sit today?
Yeah, and you know, in my prior roles, I worked with all the different railroads, and I think there is some good steps forward in the industry to provide more accurate real-time data. But like I said, I think, you know, a lot of it is knowing what to share. And so how frequently do you need to know? And how often, you know, from a customer perspective, if you put your shoes in the customers, if you put yourself in the customer's shoes, they don't need to know every place that load passes. They just want to know, is it going to meet the time frame you told me it was going to be or not? And if not, then I have to have a plan B, right? Because I got to find another way to get that product in the shelves or the product to the customer I'm sending it to. So I do think that there is a need to take that further from where railroads have gotten it to at this point, and share really like what is important to the customer. And, you know, kind of that Amazon effect. Amazon doesn't tell me every place it's driving by as it's going by. I don't need that information. All I need is to know that it's going to make it or it's not. Or, you know, maybe even more simplistic, it's going to make it in this amount of time, generally, which is really attractive for new customers as you're trying to attract new customers and grow your business. So I think that's one piece of it. And then from an intermodal perspective, you know, it is a challenge to think about using one tool as a repository. because, today in today's world, most of the railroads, most of the trucking companies, ports, they're using their own systems, and they want to be the owner of sharing that data. Now, there is some progress here in terms of how it's shared, but I think there is an opportunity to take some baby steps there. If your ultimate goal is to make yourself, from a rail perspective, much easier to do business with, there has to be some common tools that can be used so customers don't have to be an expert in so many different systems, in so many different companies' reports, and how they're interacting with the data. So while I think there's opportunities there, I think it's complicated, and it's just going to be something that there's going to have to be some steps in place to get that to a much easier place for customers.
In your opinion, what do you think is a good step forward for a company that is trying to establish an industry-wide standard for a new technology in rail? How would you advise a startup to go about trying to get all the different rail parties involved, all the class ones involved, in order to try to hopefully streamline a lot of that for the customers eventually? Now, they're not going to try to boil the ocean outright, but do you have any advice for companies that are trying to sell into the different class ones and what that might look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I worked with a lot of startups in my past life in terms, and I saw some great examples of it and some that were less successful. But I think that the big thing for a startup wanting to get into the railroad space, don't try to solve everything. There's not a railroad I know that's going to believe that you have the solution ready right now for full transparency of this complicated supply chain. I think the best way to go after it is to start with what I would call small pilots, small proof statements that get some visibility to what your solution is. So take a market, or take a lane, or take a product type within that railroad and do some testing. It's a good way to start proving that you have a solution that could be viable. I also think a thing that startups are able to do is they're able to help speed up that implementation and hopefully see value for the railroad much faster than if the railroads did it themselves. I mean, all the large railroads have very talented IT groups that are focused on innovation and delivering better tools. And so for a startup, they have to prove that they have something unique, that they are able to differentiate. And a big part of the differentiation can be getting their product to market and actually testing it. And so I think that is something that is an advantage for startups, and they should definitely use it in their sales pitch toward the railroads.
And pulling on that thread just a little bit further, what would you say are some areas of the organization or the industry that you think are ripe for a startup or kind of a growth stage vendor to come into? And by that, I mean, are there parts of the industry where the railroad company or the organization just really isn't interested in it because they have, like you said, a fantastic IT team? You guys don't really need a whole lot of help in load scheduling or network management maybe. So is it maybe focusing your attention on the customer success side, the communication side, as we kind of talked about? We did talk a little bit about visibility, but I'm curious if there's anything kind of looking at the macro environment that screams out at you of, this would be a good opportunity to work with a startup in.
Yeah, well, I think, a few places of focus when I think about the overall industry. Certainly railroads are very focused and will be particularly even more after we get through COVID-19 in figuring out how they grow their business. And so, I would categorize most railroads as very capable and putting a lot of attention on the operations side of the tools. There's still a lot of room in terms of the customer side of the tools. And I think the nice thing for startups is it's, in my opinion, much easier to show more savvy, more capable technology on the customer experience side, because it doesn't take you being a rail expert to get that done. It's showing what other industries use and making some adaptations so that it can fit in the rail world. And I think from my experience, there has been, I think there's a lot of opportunity for those tools to get more robust. And like, I mean, I'm a broken record, but certainly there's a lot of room to make rail much easier. So, you know, these railroads, they're having to prove out a business case, and them participating in a startup with one of the companies here today. You know, do you spend money and time and team members working on that? Or is there a way to get a better return someplace else? And so, you know, from a startup perspective, find ways to add value. And most of the time, you know, it may not be in you being a rail expert, but it will be important to speak a general language of railroading for that credibility. But take those other industries that it's worked in and show how it can apply in a rail perspective. I think there is a real desire and a need to make railroading just ridiculously easy. Certainly, I'm a fan of the railroads, and I want to see growth there, but it has to be an area that's much easier to do business with. So I think there's a lot of room for new technology in that space.
On the driver side or the engineering side, can you maybe inform us where technologies like computer vision or autonomous systems, where do those currently sit in the rail industry, and how far away do you think it will be before we get to you know, semi-automatic or automatic railroad systems?
Well, I certainly can't speak for the railroads on timing, but what I can say is that the railroad industry is very computer savvy. And so, you know, like I said, there's generally, if you look at all the major railroads, large IT groups that are studying it, working on it, and making sure that they're progressing much of what you're seeing in trucking and other places. So I don't know what the timing will be, but I do have confidence that you know, the types of technology railroads are developing to enable efficiencies, enable safer operations, the whole operating side of the business. There's lots of good progress being made there.
Fantastic. Well, Shawntell, thank you very much for joining us. We are out of time, but we greatly appreciate you sharing some of your insights with us. I know we're going to get some follow-ups that we'll be able to also hopefully share back with you and connect you to some interested parties. So thank you again.
Yes, thank you.
Take care.